Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona, as you can see. Um, and we're delighted to have Sally Smith with us this afternoon. She's going to be talking about her new book, A Case of Mice and Murder. And as always, if you have questions, go ahead and type them in. And Barbara usually summons me on screen towards the end of the hour, and I'd be happy to ask any of your questions. So I think that's it. Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I really like your new setup. I mean, it's a
I'm fully
double vision.
branded.
Yeah, you really are, Brandon. It's terrific. Patrick can put a buy link also in the notes field if you'd like to order a copy while you're at it. So we have an interesting history with of Mice and Murder because I fell in love with it last year, and we sold the British edition to our British Crime Club. And as I was telling Sally, a debut author and a distinguished barrister, also, I believe you have written a biography of a famous Edwardian.
Yes, absolutely. Um, I wrote a biography of an Edwardian barrister who's the same period, early 1900s, as the novel A Case of Mice and Murder. But that was a sort of serious academic biography, although he was a sort of a celebrity of his time. I mean, I think the closest you probably get is Clarence Darrow. You know, he's one of those sort of huge names who everyone heard of, who was a real showman. So he was an interesting character to write about. But then I tried my hand at fiction, and that's the route I'm going down now.
So you have given up active practice as a barrister in order to become a writer?
Yes, I have. I have. I mean, I was close to when I would have stopped anyway. And I took a sabbatical to finish the biography, and that did well. And I discovered I enjoyed writing, and I'd been, 35 years at the bar, and I'd always thought I'd like to have done something else in my life, and so that seemed to be the moment to do it. And so now I'm really, really stuck into it with second one coming out in July, and I'm in the midst of writing the third one.
Well, I'm delighted to hear that. I have a long history with British people in law who've decided they would like to write. Did you ever know Sarah Caldwell, whose actual name was not Caldwell?
Well, I mean, her novels are wonderful.
Oh,
I didn't know her well, but we had a mutual friend, so I met her on occasion before she wrote the novels, and I knew that that she stopped to write and that they'd been very successful, and then I read them in recent times and enjoyed them hugely. She was terrific, and she died quite young.
absolutely. Yep, Thus Was Adonis Murdered. It's really hard to beat Dust. And one of the brilliances for those of you that Sarah Caldwell, there are four, I think, or maybe five,
Yeah.
but anyway, they've been republished, thank God. And I mean, they are so worthwhile reading. But one of the fun things about them is that the chief law person called Hillary, you never do know whether Hillary is male or female. Sarah wrote the entire series without ever using a personal pronoun for Hillary. I mean, what a triumph.
It was an extraordinary achievement. And also, it was very interesting because it was way ahead of its time, really. I mean, she was writing them some time ago, and this sort of completely genderless person. It was very, very clever. Yes.
Well, she was very clever. She was also a really serious drinker. So I have had more than one difficult occasion with her. I'm not much of a drinker, and so if you're out with people who really are and you're not, it's kind of hard to keep the evening going. But anyway,
I have to say, the only time I've met her was in a pub.
yes, no, I'm sure you're right. She won the Anthony Award from the BoucherCon when it was in London, and I'm trying to remember what year it was. But anyway, there is a history of the temple where Sally's book takes place, which she can tell you about, but Patrick is going to show. When I was in London last June for a literary conference, Capital Crimes, I was so enchanted with this book, which I had read and which our British Crime Club picked then. I try not to tell Bloomsbury USA that too often because they would obviously like me to sell the American edition, which I'm now going to. But anyway, I made a point of going to visit the temple. So Sally can tell you what it is I looked at. This is the first of 3 photos I took.
Yes, that's the gateway through, the main gateway through into the temple. And in fact, the temple is divided between the middle and the inner temple, which are 2 separate historical associations who of the 4 inns of court, the others being Gray's Inn and Lincoln's Inn, who can call barristers to the bar. And that is the symbol of Middle Temple, the lamb and flag. Which derives from the Knights Crusaders, because the Temple Church is situated in the middle. It's an extraordinary sort of historical area of 15 acres. So if your camera had been a little to the left, you would have got the inner temple symbol, which is a silver Pegasus on a blue ground. So there are the two symbols either side of the main gates in. It's a lovely picture. You obviously had a jolly nice day too.
Well, I, was trying. This is a picture, Sally can tell you. The lower one is from the Strand looking north. And this is from Fleet Street, the other end of the temple grounds looking south towards the Thames. And I was able to talk my way inside past the guards, but they didn't encourage me to take photos. So I didn't want to annoy them.
Yeah.
I am right that that's where that is.
Yes, that is. I can't tell that there. Again, the middle and the inner temple both have gardens, and oh no, hang on, it's ridiculous. Yeah, no, I do know where that is. That's. I think that's one of the quadrangles, Hare Court, which is the whole little area is made up of a sort of series of little squares and gardens and centered around the libraries and
right. And that's kind of a view from the Strand looking towards a bit of the temple building.
Yes, that's just the edge, as you say, into the Strand. I can't place it exactly because it's
there is a temple garden on the other side of the Strand, but you can descend into and then look back. I'm sure that the original temple did not have the roadway, dividing it off.
That's quite right. Originally, the temple gardens ran all the way down to the Thames.
Right.
In the 1850s, I think it was, they began to build the embankment, which is the great big road in between, and that's a bit of the embankment.
Yeah, exactly.
In Temple Place, that is. I can place it now. Yes.
Barbara, you can almost see, if I zoom in, I'm trying to see if there's an address right there. And
yeah, I'm pretty certain that's actually Temple Place, which is
yes,
just
it is.
next door to the, it's next door to the temple, and it isn't actually, that bit doesn't have actual barristers' chambers in it. That bit has been sold away from the temple, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, it's 2 Temple Place.
The architecture is identical. It just sort of goes around the corner.
Well, one of the reasons I brought it up is that there is in the book, thank you, Patrick, a very helpful map. And I found when I was reading the book, and you will too, that in order to sort of keep yourself abreast of where you are or what's actually happening, you want to consult the map. With frequency if you don't know it. Now, what is the actual, my history of the temple is largely gained from reading P.C. Doherty and his medieval mysteries or books about the Knights Templar. But in fact, the temple, if I recall right, the city police are not able to enter the temple to solve crimes unless they are invited. Is that right?
Yes, it is, and it's an extraordinary fact, and it's one of the reasons why I was inspired to write the books, because it really lends itself to a sort of locked door mystery, because the temple is, as I said, it's a 15-acre area, and it's what's called an ancient liberty. It's a very, very curious little piece of land that's been privately owned for centuries. And although it's part of the square mile of the City of London, it's not technically under the jurisdiction of the City of London. And in the middle of it is the Temple Church, which was the Knights Crusader built in the 12th century. Yeah. And that's looked after by the 2 associations of barristers who developed around it. So it's got a sort of strange, muddled history. but the consequence of it is that the City of London police technically, I mean, obviously nowadays, you know, if we had a body, the first thing we do would be to ring the police, but technically they can't enter without the permission of the temple, and they are then they have to police in conjunction with our own private porters. So it's a very, very unusual historical situation.
It really is. It's just so perfect for writing a murder mystery. And in fact, when Gabriel Ward, the barrister who discovers the body, um, ends up largely solving or having to investigate the case along with other members of the temple because they don't want the police to come in. So why did you decide to make the Lord Chief Justice the murder victim? I mean, you know, nothing like raising the stakes to the highest level in this compound.
I suppose for that reason, and because two of the suspects are judges who aspire to his position. So I wanted a judge who other judges, you know, that one position which a number of judges might want to occupy, as indeed I think they probably do. And so that's why I chose the Lord Chief Justice.
Well, tell us about Gabriel, and in particular, I am so in love with the book that Gabriel is not only a barrister, but an aspiring author himself. And my only sadness is that you did not write any part of Gabriel's book to include. I was hoping it would show up as a little extra.
No, well, Gabriel is he's the book's set in 1901, and Gabriel is he's an archetype of barristers at that time at the English bar. I mean, they came from very, very privileged backgrounds, and they were all educated at major public schools, and they all went to Oxbridge. I mean, almost without exception. There are very, very few exceptions. So Gabriel's got this classic background. He comes from an aristocratic family. The bar were all men, of course. There were no women until 1923, and so that they had, you know, they came from these sort of collegiate backgrounds of their public schools. Then they went to Oxbridge, where they're in another collegiate background, all looking the same, with sort of medieval buildings around grass squares in the middle. And then they went on to the Temple, and I think so. He's not perhaps as unusual in his own time as he is to readers of today, but he's as a result of this sort of privileged, cloistered, all-male background, he's a reclusive, shy, highly intellectual, very brilliant barrister who has difficulties with the world outside the Temple. And he becomes a reluctant detective. But as you say, the fact that the police aren't allowed in makes that completely plausible. I mean, it would never happen nowadays. It wouldn't have happened in 1901 either, but theoretically, a complete amateur could have been asked to investigate a murder in the Temple. And so Gabriel has to investigate this murder at the same time as he's trying to conduct his completely separate legal case, because he's a barrister and he's just getting on with his day job. So the reader gets two mysteries for the price of one, because his case involves a mystery, and he's also trying to solve the murder. So that's the framework behind it.
Right. Well, I mean, definitely leads a cloistered life, and he is kind of one of those you know, English bachelors that we have often read about, that life is too comfortable for what he is. When I was at Oxford in 1986, I spent the summer at Worcester College, and I had a tutor called Mr. Pitt. And Mr. Pitt lived in the abbot's quarters, which, if I remember right, were 12th century. And he was, I mean, Gabriel reminded me so much of Mr. Pitt. He was, you know, I mean, these were his rooms, but the sadness for Mr. Pitt, and something I don't know that we would often think of, was that where he lived, his chambers at the college and his study where he taught people and so forth, were only his while he was, in fact, working at the college. He didn't own them. and he was looking towards retirement. And one of the things that preoccupied him that summer was how he was going to pack up his library and what would become of it and what would become of him. And I don't know if the same possibility awaits Gabriel. If he retires as a barrister, does he then lose his home in the temple, and is he forced to find somewhere else to live?
Well, I mean, the threat to him in the book by the treasurer, who is the head of the inner temple, when he's reluctant to become involved in being a detective, the threat is losing his beloved rooms.
Right.
And so you're right. I mean, they were like the snail's shell. You know, they were extraordinarily important to people. And the temple in those days, I think you probably would have been allowed to go on until you died, actually.
Mhm.
Because there are still residential flats in the temple, of which I'm lucky enough to have one. And certainly, as long as you go on paying the rent, you can stay there. The fact that you're not practicing at the bar doesn't mean that it's taken away from you. And in 1901, as I say, when the bar was very tiny and there was enormous deference towards the sort of senior members of it, I think probably Gabriel would have been allowed to carry on there. But I'm not sure he'd ever want to retire. That will be Gabriel's problem, because
Yes, no, I could see that Gabriel would prefer to die someplace, within the temple, still doing his work. The other thing about Gabriel, and this is the book that unfortunately Sally did not write, but I wish she had, is that he is representing rather the disputed authorship of the best-selling children's book Millie the Temple Church Mouse. And were you ever tempted to actually write Millie, or is it just going to be sort of like The Wind in the Willows or one of those classics like Narnia or something that we all, are familiar with?
Well, as you know, in the book, the case is about the authorship of that
Right.
book. So it's a copyright case, and I chose that because it's an interesting area of the law, and I think there isn't a definitive answer to the problem that arose. The book was dumped in effect in the street, and a publisher picked it up and published it, and it was an absolute smash hit. And he made large sums of money, and then a woman came forward and said, well, I'm the author, and wanted to claim the proceeds. And the case, and no plot spoilers, but the case is about whether she was in fact the author, and if she wasn't, who the proceeds of this extraordinary success should go to. And so it's quite real, the Millie the Temple Church Mouse story, but I'm not a children's book writer.
Right. No, I understand, but one did sort of long to read Millie. Well, at least see a cover, of an illustration of the book. But actually, those questions still continue today, who actually wrote the script of the movie, who actually wrote this or that. I mean, I have two or three author friends who have been involved in litigation over, somebody else using their work. And now AI, of course, is,
Of
creating a
course.
whole new universe for all of this. So what's going on in your book is indeed a timeless problem.
Yes, and I think that it stretches credulity by today's standards that they wouldn't have been able to find out who the author was. But I think, in pre-internet days, in 1900, it's not impossible that you could get into a situation where the books was sitting there, and a publisher just took it up and published it. And as I say, people inevitably think I was thinking of the sort of Harry Potter phenomenon, but actually I wasn't. I was more thinking of the sort of Peter Pan, which was was a few years later, but around about the same time. But these sort of odd, Peter Pan was partly written for the adults, partly for the children. It was a sort of odd phenomenon, and it, as you know, had the most extraordinary sort of universal appeal. And that's what I was thinking of with Millie the Temple Church Mouse. So the publisher ends up earning an absolute fortune. And
Right. Well, litigation should be for high stakes. So, there we are. Before we go any further, and we'll talk about Gabriel and the book, you might want to explain to the American audience what is the difference between a barrister and a solicitor, and who is living in the temple, because our legal system, as you know, is quite different.
Yes. I think the closest that we in 1900, we had a very, very sharp, very big division between solicitors and barristers. Nowadays, I should say that it's become very much more blurred, but we still have two distinct professions, and they go down different professional pathways. And I think the closest that you get to barristers are trial lawyers. Barristers in England are the people in wigs and gowns who go to court and argue cases in basic terms, and solicitors do all the background work as far as litigation is concerned, and lots of other things as far as the law is concerned, which have nothing to do with litigation, property and commercial issues, and all kinds
Oh,
of
they
stuff.
do, yeah, civil work and all that kind of thing, which is fascinating. I mean, I do. So in the temple, were there both barristers and solicitors at the time you're writing?
No, I mean, since 1300 in England, if you want to become a barrister, to this day, you have to be called by one of the four inns of court: Gray's Inn, Lincoln's Inn, Inner Temple, Middle Temple. And the four of them are all ancient legal associations, companies of lawyers, which are, I mean, companies I don't mean in the technical sense, I mean, groups of lawyers. And as I say, you have to be called by one of those four inns of court. And if you were practicing in London in 1900 and you were a barrister, then you would be in chambers in one of those four inns of court. So Gabriel is a member of the Inner Temple. He works in the Inner Temple, and his chambers, in fact, are my old chambers, which is number 1 Crown Office Row. And he also lives in the temple, but that's the residential bit is optional. But in those days, it would have been all barristers. But as I say, there was a very distinct difference in the two professions in 1900. And the bar were traditionally the ones in wigs and gowns who went to court and argued cases.
Right. So Gabriel, in theory, then would have some background in criminal investigation or trial work and so forth. So he wasn't, like some amateur that came in off the street in order to be charged with, I mean, he isn't a policeman or a private eye, but he does have experience in gathering evidence and presenting it.
He certainly got his experience of doing that. I deliberately didn't make him a lawyer who practiced in crime. I deliberately didn't do that because you then don't get. I mean, I'm not that kind of lawyer myself. I did all civil work myself, and so my instincts are towards civil work. But I also thought it was more interesting and unusual. There have been a lot of cases about barristers who practice in the Old Bailey and become involved in investigating murders. But the thing about Gabriel is he's an intellect, and he's a very, very serious lawyer who sits grinding away over documents all day. He's not really a showman, although he does go to court when he has to. And as the books progress, he discovers in himself more theatrical talents than he realized
Yes, he does. But Gabriel also is the person who discovers the body first. At least we think that he is the person who stumbles upon the body on an early May morning. So tell us about the crime scene.
Well, Gabriel, as I say, and as you've said, there's a map, and the relevance of the map it's quite important to work out the geography of the story. But it's also important because the temple, that part of the temple, was badly bombed during the Second World War, so that it's not as intricate. The little alleyways and things are not as intricate now, and it's more spread out and clear. But on one side of the temple is King's Bench Walk, which is one of the original bits which wasn't bombed, which is 17th century. and Gabriel lives in King's Bench Walk. He has residential rooms there, and his chambers in Crown Office Row, which is just the sort of the other side of the terrace and the garden, where my own chambers were. And he leaves his residential room one morning. This isn't a plot spoiler because it all happens on the first page. He leaves his residential room one morning, and he literally stumbles over the body of the Lord Chief Justice, which is lying across the doorway of his chambers in 1 Crown Office Row. And the Lord Chief Justice has a carving knife stuck through his chest, and he's in white tie, evening dress, which is, you know, the traditional thing which is worn for dinners, grand dinners in the temple. But he has the one oddity, which is that he's got bare feet. His shoes and socks are missing, and that's one of the things everyone has to figure out.
Well, I mean, obviously, the experienced crime reader will know that the fact the Lord Chief Justice was shoeless and sockless was going to be significant. But you're absolutely right. In order to really follow the book, you do have to keep going back and forth to the map because the geography really matters.
And I found actually when I was writing it, that was for me also a leap of the imagination. I mean, I had the plan in front of me because, of course, my own temple that I'm so familiar with is way post-war, and so I'm used to the modern setup. And if I didn't concentrate all the time, I inevitably found myself describing what I know rather than it as it was then. But I hope it's reasonably accurate.
Well, no, I think, you know, for purposes, certainly for purposes of unraveling the story, I think the map is very accurate. I love maps. I'm always happy when I get a book, a thriller or historical fiction or whatever. I don't know if you're familiar with a Substack thing called Londonist Time Machine, written by a young man named Matt something. I have put many people onto reading it. And one of the things he has been doing, I'll send you a link to it. But one of the things he's been doing is there's an astonishing 17th century map of London, and he's coloring it so that you can see all the different things, and he writes about it every day. I was put onto it by an author. You will really enjoy this. Her name, I'm going blank here for a minute, but it will come back to me. She wrote a book called Fagin the Thief, but she writes a Substack thing called Dirtbags Through the Ages. And so she writes these absolutely hilarious, you know, posts about dreadful people. She put me onto Londonist Time Machine, and I really, well, I mean, you really would love it. But what's interesting is the constancy of the maps and how they've changed. You know, how if you look at the area around the tower, for example, you know, it bears no relation. A photo that I didn't show you, Allison Epstein, thank you very much, Patrick, a fellow Northwestern University graduate. When I was there, I went out because the conference was at St. Paul's, right at the church, and there's is it the Centennial Bridge that is right below St. Paul's? All right. So anyway, I walked down, you know, one morning, coffee in hand, you know, to gaze down the river, and I couldn't see the tower because it is now all steel and glass high rises and so forth. And the tower, which, you know, used to dominate the landscape, is almost invisible now. And, you know, so the London that you're writing about, both from the war, just the march of time, Brexit, you know, all these things has definitely changed the landscape.
Absolutely, and you have to sort of be thinking about it all the time. I mean, Fleet Street, which bounds, as you all know, bounds one end of the temple, that is remarkably, that was a lot of it was built in Edwardian times, and a lot of the buildings there would be the buildings that Gabriel would have seen. Mm-hmm. So I tried to look at those. I mean, and know that, you know, that I was seeing what he would see. The shop bits underneath are modern, but the actual buildings going up are pretty as they were.
Well, they are.
I mean, one is not that long ago. It's not. I mean, the war was unfortunate, but, you know, it's not that long ago in terms of. I mean, London was huge and very urban, there were lots of things which were similar as well as the differences.
So when you walk down Fleet Street, do you ever listen for the river? I mean, because the river, you know, there was what is his name? Christopher. He died sadly not too long ago, but he wrote an absolutely brilliant series, crime series, and he loved the history of London. And one of the best books he ever wrote. Patrick, you're going to have to help me. If Christopher Fowler, that's who he is, right? Christopher Fowler. One of his very best books involved a woman who was found drowned in a completely dry room. In London. And so it all focused on all the rivers that have been paved over or, you know, and the Fleet is certainly one of the major ones.
It is, and oddly enough, in my second book, the second Gabriel Ward, there is actually a reference to the Fleet running under Fleet Street. And there are, to this day, there's a grating somewhere where you can see it when the rain is high. But it's a very odd thought to walk down that pavement, I think, and think, you know, the river has been running underneath it for all these centuries.
Absolutely. I always think of it. I think it's completely fascinating. I mean, you know, London, actually, the square mile of London is the square mile. You know, I mean, it isn't. I met a friend at Covent Garden so we could have lunch on the new rooftop cafe. And I was thinking, you know, it'll take me forever to walk from St. Paul's to Covent Garden. Well, it actually didn't. You know, I mean, compared to New York or Chicago or Phoenix, where I live, which is the largest city geographically now in the United States, but it's an automobile city. You know, you can't walk it at all. But I think I'm often kind of surprised when I'm in London about all those historic land, how close together they really are by American standards, and you can really walk it.
Yes, in the central, you can. Yes.
Indeed. So Gabriel, reluctantly, but under heavy pressure, because he doesn't really want to lose his chambers and all, winds up investigating this case. And then we learn about hidden motives and past histories and ambitions and so forth of other people living in the temple. So in a way, it's kind of like an academic. It's sort of like Tony Hillerman's Thief of Time, where, you know, much of what goes on is fueled by people who want to rise or get tenure or rise academically and so forth. And so I guess any professional organization is like that, where people, you know, inevitably want to rise higher.
Yes, yes. I mean, I don't think they all murder to get there.
No. Well,
certainly, I mean, it's full of people with aspirations to get to the next stage. I mean, junior barristers want to be KCs, and KCs want to be judges, and then a whole new ladder starts of, you know, High Court, Court of Appeal, Supreme Court, goes on and on. So ambitions never end, really.
Right. Well, Gabriel, so not a spoiler, because you've already mentioned that you're writing another book. Gabriel survives this case. So, you know, I mean, our sleuth is there. And I said, one of the great things about historical fiction is that you don't have to worry about time, real time. So Gabriel could complete this case, and the very next day he could start a new case without the kind of pressure that authors like Ian Rankin and Michael Connelly gave themselves by aging their policemen in real time, and eventually aged them right out of being policemen. But you don't have to deal with that. So in your sequel, does Gabriel move forward, but not very much? You don't want to get to the war, presumably. So
that's quite right, and I've been conscious of that in my own mind, but that, of course, is the end of the Edwardian era, and exactly. And it really was, you know, and it was the end of so much. I mean, it was the end of this very rigid class structure that existed in England in the early 1900s. So Gabriel's really very much a figure of his time, and you're right. I think the First World War would be the end of that, but he's got some way to go before he gets there. The next book is a year later.
Well, you don't even have to go that far, you know. I mean, you could have him go back to work the next month or the next day for all that.
Yeah, yes. That's true. Yes. I mean, I could. Yes. And the third one, I mean, I won't give it away, partly because I haven't finished writing it yet, but the third one involves an historic event, which took place in 1903. So I've had to, I have to be aware of sort of fitting them into an appropriate time scale.
Sure.
And as I say, the second one, which is coming out in July, is set a year later. And also, it just becomes slightly ridiculous if they're really. I mean, it's ridiculous anyway. Of course, it is, because you don't go falling over bodies every day of the week. But if they're really close together, it stretches people's credulity. I think they think, good heavens, this man's living somewhere where there's a body every week.
No, that's really not true. People who read crime fiction are used to suspending disbelief. And if you are writing a series, and especially if you're writing one that has a relatively closed environment, it's always going to be the case that the number of bodies that pile up is, going to be ridiculous. But readers don't care. That's really, I mean,
well, I mean, they're all standalone. So, I mean, you read them as a story, don't you? But what I do hope is that, I mean, Gabriel, as I say, he's a very, very buttoned up man with a lot of problems, really, although he wouldn't say that himself. I mean, he's happy in his life, but it's certainly a very restricted one. And he grows as the books go on. He manages more than he thought that he was going to be able to, partly as a result of the support he has from the young policeman who befriends him.
Wonderful. Well, I don't know if you've ever read them, but I am madly addicted to the works of a British, not just a barrister, but a judge, one of the very few judges who has ever written crime fiction. And he wrote it under an assumed name. So he wrote the books as Cyril Hare.
Cyril Hare.
And A Tragedy at Law is one of my all-time favorite books. And it will take you up to the 1930s when you'll be glad to know that judges were still preceded by trumpeters as they did the secret.
I love Cyril Hare, and I know the one because it starts off, "No trumpeters," said Mr. Justice, whoever. It's a very, very charming beginning. When judges went out on assize, they did indeed have trumpeters to make this sort of big thing when they arrived in the assize towns, and it's it's a charming book. He wrote some very, very good stuff, and actually some very interesting legal problems behind them too.
He did. Francis Pettigrew is an interesting character, but but actually, A Tragedy at Law is one of the very first unreliable narrators in a world where we're used to Gone Girl and the whole unreliable narrator trope that has resulted. Cyril Hare back there in the 1930s. And my friend Scott Turow, also in Presumed Innocent, he and I have talked about that. Yet another unreliable narrator in the literary world. But very few judges, actually, Sally, and there's only a handful, and except for Cyril, the two that are the most well-known and popular in America were both administrative judges. And so their cases were not really subject to review in the same way that, I mean, I've had many conversations with policemen, reporters, and all, and part of the reason they write is that they would like to see a form of justice affected that didn't necessarily happen in real life. But, judges probably don't really want to be reviewed for the results of their cases, and so they don't write them very often. Anatomy of a Murder is one of the great classics written by a judge here. And then there was another judge called William Coughlin, a Michigan judge who wrote several terrific legal thrillers. But
yes, I mean, I can't think of a judge other than Cyril Hare, English. I mean, there've been barristers, plenty of barristers, including John Mortimer, of course, who's the Rumpole.
Rumpole, yep.
But no, they haven't. But that maybe, I don't know whether that may be because judges are rather discouraged from doing anything else in England. I mean,
but that's true in America too. I think it's just that, in a judge's world, things are settled. Whereas in the, police, possibly barrister, reporter world, stories aren't necessarily settled. Or maybe the result of the entire prosecution didn't suit them. I don't know. I mean, Scott Turow and I grew up together, went to high school together, went to Stanford together. Well, he's younger than I am, but not by a whole lot. And And so it's been interesting to, talk to him over the years about his work, which kind of parallels. Well, I'll tell you what is, and you'll find it to be true, although you're writing historical fiction, but I do find it unnerving at the age of 85 to realize that my life has become history. And I have authors, writing about, books set in like the 1960s, which, you know, for them is like, they have to do research, and I'm going, okay, here's what I was doing. I mean, it is, as we age, I think, that's one of the things that um, we discover is that, we really have become part of history when we get to a certain point.
Yes, I mean, I think anyone who has lived pre-internet days has a completely different perspective,
Yeah.
and it's so, it still doesn't seem odd to me. I mean, I remember so clearly a life where one didn't have instant communication. But when you talk to people who really young people who have no experience of life without it, it really is a different world. So I think, that as you say, the history has become more and more. A shorter time has become incredibly historic because, but if it's pre-internet, it seems medieval compared
Yes.
to what we're
I
doing
know.
now.
I think the line has kind of crept up, at least in fiction, to 50 years. If it's like the 1970s by now, we're kind of in an historical era. So before Patrick comes up, my friend Janice Hallett, whom I truly love and who books I have been privileged to debut here in the United States and whom I have spent time and had tea with in London, wrote a quote for Sally's book, and she sent her regrets that I forgot to ask her to join us till it was too late. But anyway, Sally, this is what Janice, marvelous writer, has to say. Sally Smith's debut novel is an absolute delight. Bright, lively writing that's so evocative, I was transported to the fascinating world of the Inner Temple in 1901. Me too, actually. Gabriel Ward is a character crafted with such timeless elegance, I was immediately besotted. As brilliant a cozy crime story as you'll ever read, I can't wait to immerse myself in the next installment of this ingenious new series. Hell, I could have written that myself because I definitely agree with
I'm
you.
very, very flattered. It's very kind of you to read it. I really am flattered because I'm a great fan, and I thought I loved the appeal. I thought it was an absolutely
Brilliant. And The
terrific.
Examiner is pretty good too, but
I haven't yet read that, and I'm looking forward to it. So as I
well,
said, it's very sweet of you to tell me what you said because I'm very flattered.
well, it's our pleasure. Patrick, come and join us and see if we have any comments or questions from viewers.
All right. Let's see. We do. Um, Forgive me if you've already addressed this, but there's a question about the wigs that barristers wear in court. Is that still something is that a tradition that still lives on today?
Yes, yes, we still wear wigs. Not, no, I mean, depending on what the case is, but for many cases, we wear wigs.
Where does one get a wig? There's got to be like a wig supplier.
There is, yes, there's I mean, I'm sure there's more than one, but there is a main wig supplier in Chancery Lane, just who supplies all the the ceremonial stuff, all the judges' robes and the barristers' robes, and the wigs are made of horsehair, and they're really, they look as though they're uncomfortable, but they are completely comfortable. Complete, you're not aware that you're wearing it. In fact, you're so not aware that you're wearing it that I, on one occasion, forgot to take mine off and walked out into Fleet Street from the law courts and to get a sandwich at lunchtime, and was standing in the queue in the sandwich bar wearing my wig.
That's great. Yeah, a couple of people are actually intrigued by the objects behind you on your bookshelves, and I am too. I'm interested in that sun little sculpture. What can you tell us about that?
Yes. That actually, there is exactly. It's very interesting. That is the sun it's made of lead. It's the sun insurance sign for. It was an insurance company, and pre public insurance, if you had one of those on your house, then the fire engine would come and put the fire out. If you didn't have one, they wouldn't come. It was in the early 1800s. It was a sign that said that you were insured. Your house was insured. And my grandfather was an architect, and it was taken off a house that was demolished when I was a child, and my father always had it on his bookshelves, and now I've got it on mine. I hadn't realized it showed. God only knows what else is showing.
Is that are the numbers? Is that the address of the house?
That's the it's the insurance company number, reference number for each individual. Yeah, as I say, it's lead, so it's heavy.
So they would just, if you didn't have one of those, they just let your house burn down?
Well, that's the good story that is told. Whether it's really true or not, I don't know.
What is the little house on the other side? There's a little building.
I live in Bath. And I don't know if you know Bath. It's a famous, dozens and dozens of Georgian buildings. So it's a World Heritage Site, very beautiful city. And that's actually, it's an old chocolate box. There's a chocolatier in Bath, which has just begun, which is named after an 18th century chocolatier, and they make these little boxes to look like Bath houses. And in fact, it's very like the house I'm sitting in. We're part of a Georgian terrace. So.
I love it. So do you actually go and drink the waters? My attempts to do it, I have never quite managed it. I think it's pretty awful.
I don't go and drink them, but that you can go and into the water. In the old days, you used to actually be able to go in the Roman baths, but they closed those down many years ago now. But it's all siphoned off into a very beautiful spa high up in the air, which you can go and go in the waters there. So I do that, but I don't drink them. No, I'm not sure anyone does any longer.
Bath is a lovely city. Any Jane Austen fan, obviously, is familiar with Bath, the Royal Crescent, where I'm happy to say the only dog spit that I have ever really admired in England is located. Is it in number 1? I think it is, in the Royal Crescent.
Yes, number 1.
The National Trust likes to take you to see wonderful sights. And when I was there, I remember they pointed out the dog spit with great pride. But unfortunately, the dog was not present. So I assumed it was a hefty dog that walked around and, turned the spit so that the meat would roast in the giant fireplace in the kitchen. But
no, it's a beautiful.
Did you know Peter Lovesey, who sadly left us in January, a lovely author, and he wrote many books about a Bath policeman called
I have read a couple of them.
Peter Diamond, and well, he's a brilliant plotter, so clever. But the city of Bath is really his main character. So if you're taking an occasional break, you might want to read the Peter Diamond books because they are really.
As I say, I have read a couple of them, and yes, and I will go back to them. I'd rather forgotten, but they are, as you say, and they're very evocative of Bath too.
Yeah.
Barbara, do you remember the Bruce Alexander series?
I do. That was Georgian.
Sir John Fielding. Was he a judge? I can't remember. Blind. He was blind.
What, Sir Henry Fielding? I thought that he was a Bow Street magistrate. I don't remember that he was a Bow Street magistrate, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. Yes.
So he was an investigator more than he was. Well, he was a magistrate. Yeah.
No, he was a magistrate. Yes, he was. I'm pretty sure he was the first. He was a stipendiary magistrate at Bow Street. Yes, which is a paid. Some of our magistrates are volunteers, sort of pillars of the community who sit in the small courts in local areas. But the stipendiaries are paid lawyers who were employed in the City of London, and he was one of them.
That was a wonderful series. Another great author that left us too soon, but it was very evocative of London. Anything else?
You mentioned Sarah Codwell earlier. I remember when I first started here, I met her. So I think she was here for the Left Coast.
Yeah, she came to visit one time. Her brother, I'm trying to remember, he was quite a famous journalist. She came from a very distinguished family, not called Caldwell. His name was Andrew, I think. It'll come to me. He was a really well-known journalist, and they all were drinkers. I mean, they all were just amazing. But Sarah was, I don't think I've ever met anybody like Sarah. She was just,
I could not understand a word she said. I remember.
no, my husband absolutely adored her. And we were in Cornwall for, I think, a Crime Writer Association meeting before the London BoucherCon, where she won the Anthony, but she'd been nominated for it. And her desire, while we were in Falmouth or somewhere like that, was to buy a dress that would be appropriate for the banquet in case she won the award. And if you knew Sarah, she was probably the worst dressed woman in the Western world. I mean, just terrible. And so Rob and I were tasked with going with her to her dress shops or whatever it was. I think it was Falmouth, but it could have been something else. Anyway, to try to find Sarah a dress that she could wear to the banquet. And we did succeed, and she did win the award. And I was really so glad for her because,
Yes.
yeah, I mean, she personified British eccentricity in a way that is, classic. I mean, it really was. She was so intelligent. Um, and
Didn't she take snuff? I seem to remember her hands were just like brown.
she did.
She did take snuff. I remember that. Yes, as I said, I
Yeah.
mean, I really didn't know her well, but we had a friend in common who was at Oxford with her, and so I was introduced to her when in my youth.
I'm not sure she didn't smoke a pipe. In fact, I sort
That
of have
sounds
a
right.
bigger memory that she didn't take snuff so much as she actually smoked a
Maybe it was a
pipe. I
Okay, so
remember
she
that
was.
we were in London for something, and we had a dinner date with some author whose name is escaping me. And my husband and I made the error of agreeing to have a drink with Sarah in her chambers. And at 9 o'clock, I was this is before you could text people. So, here our poor dinner partner was out in the wild somewhere. And here we were, with Sarah and Mike Ripley, I think it was. And it was just one of those evenings where, you wanted to make your escape and you couldn't, somehow you just couldn't like escape the net. And then you felt ruder and ruder because you knew you were standing people up at Simpsons on the Strand or something. It was wonderful. So, like many things in life, it comes back to that wonderful line in Henry II, the play, when Peter O'Toole walks to the front of the stage while his children are plotting to kill him and his wife and his mistress are over in the corner and all. And he looks out at the audience and he says, I don't know what history will say, he said, but I will tell you this, it's going to read a lot better than it's lived. And I thought there are many moments in life where you could say that it will read or tell a lot better than it's lived. And I have gotten through many difficult moments in life by reminding myself, that no matter how awful it is, it will become a story that will be worth repeating somewhere else. So anyway,
I like retreating into writing them.
I hope you never actually trip over the body of the Chief Justice while you
I
are
hope I don't too.
in the temple, but you have written a wonderful story without the actual experience of finding a body. And I'm so excited to read your July book. So we are partners with the London bookstore, so I will forthwith order more copies of
Thank you.
book
That's very
two.
kind.
And thank you very much for spending time with us today. And for those of you who haven't had the treat of reading A Case of Mice and Murder, I certainly recommend it. This is my copy. It's now available. So lovely to be with you, Sally. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's been good fun and very nice to meet you.
You're
Thank you.
welcome. Bye.